Hello and welcome to In the Court of the Wenton Knave. We've got a special one this week because we have the Epitaph box set. Oh yes. This is very special. I think this is the, for Crimson 69, this is it. This is the one you want. It's got everything you need on it. Not the album, as I said. I would imagine to some people this is it. This is like the moment in King Crimson. Those that consider the 69 band to be the best band. I don't. I think the best is still to come. Kind of comparable to when I was talking about the very early Zappa stuff, that people think of the Mothers, the band, the original Mothers, as being something definitive, and I don't agree with that. This is a different thing, obviously, because Fripp isn't really like Zappa, because he's not really such a leader in that sense. I'll talk about that later as well. But yeah, this is sublime. I mean, bear in mind there's only about 3 songs in the whole catalogue I don't like. So I'm a big King Crimson fan, obviously. But I think the Volume 1 and Volume 2 are things people should hear. There'll be a few things in the catalogue that things everybody should hear, and this is one of them. It's actually 4 discs, but when I bought it, it was 2 discs, and then you sent off separately for discs 3 and 4. I don't know how DGM sell it now. I don't know if they just do the whole thing together, or whether it's still 2 separate things, whether you can actually order Volume 3 and 4 without Volume 1 and 2. I wouldn't do that, because 3 and 4 are audience recordings, although great performances. Importantly, we have their very first recordings on here. The BBC sessions, there's 4 tracks. The first 2 tracks were recorded in May '69, so they are the very first recordings the band did, as far as we know. Well, they played their first gig in April. I Talk to the Wind was removed because of the Out-of-Tune Mertron, sadly. So we don't have I Talk to the Wind on this album at all. There was only one live I Talk to the Wind, and it's on live at the Marquee in horrible sound quality, which is a shame because they played it quite differently. We also have, as well as the BBC sessions, we've got the Fillmore East 21st of November, which I talked about last week, without the In the Court of the Crimson King, not the 22nd of November, so that counts as a separate album. I've done Epitaph here because I think this represents Fillmore West, because the rest of the Fillmore East show is filled up with a Fillmore West show, Mantra, Travel Wary, Capricorn, Improvisation and Mars, to make it like a full performance. It turns out it's actually missing In the Court, which I didn't think was there. For years I thought they opened with Manor City. And then we've got Disc 2, which is a complete Fillmore West performance, and it is their last show, the final show. And it's interesting actually on that show how the band are introduced by this guy who says this is one of the new interesting bands. This is King Crimson, which is amusing, because that's how people react. You say you like bands, people react in different ways, and they don't. With King Crimson, they don't say, "Oh, that's good," or "King Crimson." Oh. They say, "King Crimson. That's interesting." Which always amuses me. That's what people always say. So this American tour, the band weren't communicating properly. They were young. Young people don't communicate with each other properly. Giles and MacDonald basically left the band, and by the time they got to Fillmore West, 15th of December, we know that decision had been made. You can understand, Fripp's sort of single-minded pursuit of the band, his belief in the band, maybe that didn't help. That must have felt like a very forceful input, and they kind of admitted they regretted leaving afterwards, but MacDonald did tell Fripp, well, it was in a car journey apparently, it didn't sound very nice, but Fripp was in the front and the two of them were in the back, and they said, don't blow you anymore. And Ian MacDonald said, well, I don't like the way you play my songs. Quite understandably, Fripp took umbrage with that. I think importantly, Ian MacDonald's input is huge. Michael Giles' input is huge as well, let's not forget that, in terms of playing. But Ian MacDonald had part of the whole vibe of the band was coming from Ian MacDonald because he was writing the music, and although Fripp had what he calls the raison d'etre, Ian MacDonald was bringing something as well, and that went with him, if you like, or they tried to keep it a bit for the next couple of albums, but it wasn't really there anymore. Ian MacDonald is influenced by the Moody Blues. That's one way of putting it, but also the swing thing as well, as I've said. So, in the same way, Adrian Belew's contribution was, may have even been greater, but Adrian Belew's contribution was so huge. He's so important to the band. And I do think, before they sort of got it together, it took a few albums to get it together. The next 2 albums could have definitely benefited from MacDonald's arranging ability. Of course, if MacDonald had been in the band, they would have had different songs anyway, so there's kind of an alternate Crimson somewhere, in an alternate reality, with Ian MacDonald still in the band. It would have been very different. Let's have a look in the box just to show you. You get quite an extensive book. There's a few different bits and pieces. There's stuff written by each member of the band. There's a lot of stuff written by Fripp about the band, about the business as well. There's also a description of Endless Grief, which obviously I'll talk about much later in here as well. And then you've got your 4 discs. The 4 discs. So, starting with Volume 1, or Disc 1, we have the first 2 tracks are BBC radio sessions, the original session in May, and sadly it's been thrown away, hasn't it? The BBC have thrown it away. Thanks BBC for throwing away all the cool stuff. This is actually a transmission bootleg, so it is a bootleg. Someone recorded, I think it said in Italy, someone in Italy recorded it off the radio, and they've had to clean it up quite a bit. Sometimes BBC sessions of bands are definitive. A lot of bands around this time, the BBC sessions tend to be very, very good because they're well recorded, but they haven't got the pressure of making their album. They're just free to play and they're recorded well. And they can also overdub live stuff if you like. It's too early for that, I think. This isn't a definitive version of Schizoid Man. It's quite a light version. It feels quite light. They only wrote it a couple of months before. I mean, so it's quite early. And it's too early, really, but an interesting early version of Schizoid Man. Track 2 is In the Court of the Crimson King. Strangely, this one is from the Masters, so for some reason they threw out 21st Century Schizoid Man and kept In the Court. I don't know why they did that, but so they have the actual Masters of In the Court, so it does sound better. The lyrics are different because it's much earlier. Supposedly, there was a very different song completely in Peter Sinfield's previous band, and the music was completely changed, but some of the lyrics were brought across. And it's obvious the lyrics developed over time. These are even more different than Hyde Park. Hyde Park was different as well, but obviously this is even earlier. But yeah, so that's the earliest recordings we have, because track 3 is from later, which is actually the 19th of August. So by this time they really hit their stride, and that's probably the peak of the band. Again, it's a transmission bootleg. They haven't got the masters, sadly, because this might be because this is the only studio performance of Get Thy Bearings. So that's really important, and it is really good. Track 4 from the same session on the 19th of August is Epitaph. Might be the best version, either this or Fillmore East. One of the Fillmore Easts, probably the first one, are the best versions. This is probably a better recording of Epitaph. I hope it is the best version. Tracks 5, 6 and 7 are from Fillmore East, the 21st of November, which I talked about last week, so I'm not going to talk about them again. And then the idea is that the rest of the disc, 8, 9, 10 and 11, are from Fillmore West on the 14th of December, so the day before the last show. It seems to be a better performance than the day after. That's been put there to make that Fillmore East show into a complete show. And it works very well. That's the bit I like to listen to. I like to put on track 5 and listen to a 69 show with proper recording. I mean 8, 9 and 10, they're the definitive versions because they're the only professional recordings of Mantra, Travel Weary and An Improvisation. So by default they're the definitive versions of those songs, because we only have dodgy recordings of those things elsewhere. And then we've got Mars. Oh my god, Mars. And I think that's the best version. It's certainly the best properly recorded version, so it is the most enjoyable version in a way. It's nowhere near the marquee version in terms of performance. It's obvious, but obviously the sound quality means that this is more enjoyable, I think, so that's the definitive version. Volume 2 is simpler in that it is Fillmore West, 15th of December, the final show. They've split up. The band have now split up. It is, though, a soundboard mix, sadly. It's a soundboard. It's not multi-track, so they weren't able to mix it, and apparently the guitar was much louder. The guitar is quite quiet, and you've got a lot of sax, which is interesting. Supposedly, I think it was Fripp said it's probably their worst performance. I think it's on a par with Hyde Park. It's probably a better performance than Hyde Park, if anything. It's a safer performance than Hyde Park, certainly. And it's got drop-in instead of Get Thy Bearings, and I prefer drop-in. And it's a better recording, so I wouldn't take that too seriously because it's well recorded. It opens within the Court of the Crimson King. As I said, they open the shows within the Court of the Crimson King. Why? It doesn't make sense. It shouldn't be there. It's wrong. They should open the shows with the Manor City, but I suppose it was a new song, so they didn't realise that. Track 2, Drop In. It's actually incomplete, apparently. It's actually cut. But it's still the best Drop In because it's the only proper recording of Drop In. And they had to cut out the guitar solo because the tape ran out, sadly. It's too long. It's too long anyway, so I think actually having it as 5 minutes 14, it works very well actually. So I think it's a wonderful version. That's one of the highlights really, because we haven't really got it properly elsewhere. Tracks 3, 4 and 5 are Amana City, Epitaph, 21st Century Schizoid Man, same as Fillmore East. They're not as good as the Fillmore East performances. Very similar, not as good. I think measurably not as good. There's a bit of a buzz on the PA at some point as well, bzzz, so that spoils it a bit. Track 6 is Mars, so there's no mantra, travel wary Capricorn. Apparently they had to use audience recording at the start from a bootleg to and the announcement of it to fix the continuity, so it's possible that actually Mantra and Travel Wary were performed and the tape ran out just like it did at Fillmore East, but they put another tape on or something, so they put that there to make it sound like a complete show. It seems a shame they didn't play those 2 tracks and just went straight into Mars, but they were pretty miserable at the time and they themselves didn't consider it a good performance. Overall, Volume 2 not as good as this one. Not as good as this one. This one is where it's at. Volume 3, which originally I had to send off for, I don't know if you get it with it now, is Plumpton Festival, 9th of August. Again, right in the middle of it, about a month after Hyde Park, a few days before the second BBC sessions. It's a great performance. It's got Get Thy Bearings. Really, this is representing the peak of the band in terms of playing, I think. Volume 4 is Chesterfield Jazz Club, which I think is slightly better. Again, both Volume 3 and 4 are audience recordings. They're better sound than Marquee, but they're still pretty wretched. They are audience recordings from 1969. I think Volume 4, I think the performance is better, but I also like it because it's a more complete performance, because you've got everything but In the Court of the Crimson King. You've got Drop In and Get Thy Bearings. And we've got the Mantra, Travel Wary, Capricorn, Improv and Mars is on there as well, so it's almost the whole thing, But in all of that, No I Talk to the Wind, sadly, it was removed because the Mellotron was out of tune. See you next week, finally, for another album, In the Wake of the Poseidon.